Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I did that was really, really scary and that you can be reading about pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. But before we get started, I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the US and outside of the US. You can schedule a free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. Okay, so let's jump into this today. I haven't even talked about this. So I started writing about my social anxiety about 5 years ago. And I started to really enjoy writing in a different sort of way. I have written a lot of books. They were workbooks. I've written Anxiety Sucks, a teen survival guide. I've written a social skills workbook. It's Brave to be Kind. These are all children's books, right? My most recent book, Crushing OCD Workbook for Kids. I actually have a new children's picture book for OCD, which I haven't talked about yet, coming out next year. But I have a memoir coming out next month. Yikes. And unless you really follow me, like in depth, and you're on my hidden other Instagram account, which I'll talk about in a second, you may not know that I'm doing this because I haven't talked about it at all. I've actually been kind of waiting until I have to talk about it, which is now because it's coming out in a month. And now is the time I need to start talking about it. So what happened was I started to decide I was going to do a memoir. Part of the reason why I wanted to do a social anxiety mental health memoir is because I was actually ironically searching for a memoir for me. I love, let me say it again, love memoirs. I love memoirs. And that may not be your thing, but the reason why I love memoirs is because I love stories. I love real stories. And I think it's the therapist in me. I love to hear people's life stories. I love to hear what their struggles were and their internal dialogue and what they worked through. And so I especially love mental health memoirs. I devour them, and I really love memoirs in general. And I had read a couple of books on social anxiety and anxiety in general to focus on my own anxiety. Social anxiety has crippled me. And I know that may be hard to believe for those of you that haven't listened to me for a long time. It may seem like, how can she have social anxiety? She sounds so comfortable and confident. I'll talk about it. I have a good mask, but I wanted to just read someone else's experience because part of social anxiety is feeling like you're the only one. And I know with most mental health struggles, everybody feels like they're the only one. But with social anxiety in particular, social anxiety itself convinces you that it's not social anxiety, that people just don't like you, or that you're just not enough. And so it's hard to feel like you have a physiological struggle and that it's not you. And it's hard to believe that there are other people who think the way that you do. So I searched for memoirs, and there were some memoirs that were mental health memoirs that touched on social anxiety, but there were none that I found, none that were popular or in the mass media. There were some, I think, that were self-published, but there was nothing that I found that was on Audible or something that, was widely consumed that was purely just social anxiety. And so I was like, that's so weird. And then I thought about it and I'm like, actually, that's not too weird. Because if social anxiety is your number one front burner issue, because like I said, there are some memoirs that talk about anxiety, depression, and social anxiety. But when social anxiety is the dominant thing that's crushing you, the core fear is feeling naked and vulnerable in front of other people. I mean, that's really at the crux of it. The fear of judgment, the fear of rejection. And writing a memoir is literally the opposite of hiding, right? It's just putting you out there in a very literal, naked way. And so then I was like, I guess it's not surprising that people have not wanted to publish a social anxiety memoir. So then I decided I'm doing this because that's kind of what I do anyway. It's really actually very therapeutic for me normally in general to help you with your child's anxiety or OCD to talk about my own family struggles and my own kids and my own experiences. I mean, that's always been my teaching method, is to be really vulnerable and raw with whoever I work with, including, the families I work with in my practice in a professional way. It always had intention of teaching a lesson or something, but I was a storyteller underneath my therapy style. So it made sense to tell my story about my social anxiety. I wasn't expecting the level of like fear and concern about this until it started to come closer. So after the break, I'll talk about all the things I'm really worried about. But I want to start with telling you about the book and what it entails and why I wrote it. So I started writing it 5 years ago, believe it or not. Isn't that crazy? It was done. Well, so I got really into memoir writing. So a lot of people I think misunderstand memoir. I was talking to my uncle about this and he's like, aren't you too young to write your biography? I was like, well, then he kind of said, and I don't think he meant to be offensive, but he was like, you're not famous. So like, can you write a memoir? Like famous people write memoirs. Okay. So that was a little bit offensive, but the best thing about him is like, he just says it. He has no filter. So you got to work on your own anxiety and, be able to handle that. But I explained to him, a memoir is different than a biography or an autobiography. An autobiography is someone's entire life. It is, yes, that's someone who's famous. They write an autobiography or someone writes it about them, and that's a biography. A memoir, as I was trying to explain to him, anyone can write a memoir. A memoir is a topic. It's one thing. You could be a memoirist, that's actually a word, and write multiple memoirs about different experiences. And I love that. So I actually wound up finding this incredible writer and teacher who actually wrote a book on how to write a memoir. And I started taking her classes. She did like in-depth writing classes on how to write in general, but she was a memoirist. She's written several memoirs. And so I had already kind of written the book. Then I took her classes. And then when I was in the editing phase, then my husband died suddenly. And so the book was done. I was just editing it and everything came to a halt. So the book was completely finished a week actually before my husband died. So it's just crazy how that worked out. So it got put on the shelf. I withdrew from her class and it got dusted. Dusted? No, it got dusty. I don't know why I said that. And I just didn't think I was ever going to come back to it. I was just like, it seemed trivial compared to like what I was dealing with. And I also didn't know, like the book was already wrapped up and then something major happened to me. And this is the other interesting thing that happened is when he died, and it was sudden, for those of you that don't know me and haven't followed my journey, he died 3.5 years ago. He was only 42. He had Achilles tendon outpatient surgery. And then a week later, he died in his sleep. He didn't really die in his sleep. I discovered him in the morning and it was due to a blood clot. He was unresponsive, taken to the hospital, and then he died like 2 minutes later. So horrific, horrible experience. And at the time that I had written the book, I had felt that I had like really crushed my social anxiety. And so there's this kind of like feeling in the book that was like, hurrah, like she's crushed it. She's going to still work on it, but she's really crushed it. And then he dies. And I didn't realize until that moment or that period of my life that he was really like this safety net, and that my social anxiety was about to experience things on another level, because not only was I dealing with grief, which is so hard in and of itself, especially when it's sudden, you're not emotionally ready or planning. It's like being jump scared. Like your life is just going along and then all of a sudden it's upside down and you're like, what just happened? For someone who already has anxiety, that's even harder because I like control and I like stability and I like routine. So it would throw anyone for a loop. But when you add those other struggles that were already there, it was paralyzing. It was immobilizing. I literally couldn't speak. I couldn't form a sentence, a coherent sentence. I was worried I would never be able to actually be able to teach or speak again because my brain was such a bundle of muddy thoughts. But the added layer that happened was he was my go-to person. And so even though we had our own relationship issues, he was my best friend and I was his best friend, and we didn't have any outside people. Like he didn't have any friends that he actively went out and hung out with outside of work. And I had no friends because I only have so much space in my world and in my life, and he was plenty. And so we did everything together. We showered in the morning together. We brushed our teeth together. We got the groceries together. We went and ran errands together. There wasn't, if he was going to bed, I was going to bed. If he woke up, I woke up. Like there was, we were very symbiotic. And I don't think I realized to what degree until after he was gone, because he was also he was like a safety net to my social anxiety. And I think he liked that role. So if the kids had a birthday party to go to, he knew I wasn't going to go unless he'd come with me. Or sometimes he'd go for me. If we had to go do something, he was always there with me. And so if we had to go to a school concert, he would go with me because I didn't want to sit by myself. It would feel too uncomfortable. And so when he was gone, not only was I dealing with the grief and the loneliness and just the thing that any young-ish widow, I was 6 years older than him, 41, 42. So I was 48 at the time. So that was really overwhelming. I think grief in general is overwhelming, but I was realizing that driving someplace by myself and navigating it and dealing with people, because he was always kind of the one to talk to people and the one to do things. And I was just riding his coattails. It was just nice because he was hysterical and funny and charismatic. And he kind of took over the room when he was around. And I liked that because I was able to kind of be in his shadows. And so it was really hard for me to take my kids to play dates, or to even go to a school function or a concert, or to even sit in a restaurant with just my kids. My social anxiety was out of control. So then for a little while, I felt like a fraud. I can't even pursue this memoir because I'm a wreck. The other thing that happened within the first few months of him passing was the enormous amount of people that were at my front door. So he was an FBI agent, and he wasn't just an agent. He was adored by people. He was really, really good at what he did. So he's kind of a little bit of a legend in that workspace. He had a really specific set of skills, a skill set that people around the country and even sometimes outside of the country would seek out his expertise. And so he was just hysterical, like I mentioned. So everybody in the office knew him. The whole division knew him because he was that guy. It's funny because at home he shut down and he wasn't that guy. He especially as he got a little bit older, he was very extroverted and charismatic and outgoing outside, but not in the home, which I think a lot of people maybe are like that. But they wanted a huge funeral for him. And I didn't even want a funeral for him. I was, I have social anxiety. I'm an introvert. This was a private matter. I didn't have friends or family. My family was pretty disconnected, and my siblings are all over the country. My parents are both dead. And so I just wanted a private, little thing, maybe with his sister. But they wanted a huge, 250 people funeral. This is during COVID. And so with that being said, there were a lot of people coming to my door and it was super overwhelming. His boss, his like supervisor actually was amazing and took the lead and was like, everybody go through me and then I will just communicate that with Natasha. And I am forever grateful for him. He was absolutely amazing. And also my husband's partner at work was amazing as well. But I had to like start to build up my social anxiety struggles again and be comfortable being completely vulnerable and doing everything on my own. So I didn't pick up the book again for, gosh, I don't even know. I'm not even sure. One thing that I've been robbed of, I think, since that trauma is my brain. Like I'm not lucid anymore when it comes to like time frames and stuff. So anyway, I have no idea. I think it was 2 years later. I think it was probably a year and a half to 2 years later that I eventually picked it up again and wanted to work on it. I had done so much work in that year and a half to be able to do really hard things. And for anyone who's been following me for a while, I was terrified. Like he drove everywhere. And so I was a very independent person when I met him, but I became much more dependent because he was a dominating person where he kind of liked to take over and like he liked to take care of. I feel like he was kind of, his soul was like from the 1950s. He wasn't like misogynistic or anything, but he did have some old-fashioned beliefs that kind of oozed out. Like he would drive, that kind of stuff. And it really inadvertently robbed me of a lot of independence that I didn't realize until after he was gone, that I was so used to him doing everything for me. And when you have someone do something for you for 12 years, I was with them for 12 years, you get used to that and you start to lose those skills. And then when you add the social anxiety component on it, getting back and having those skills is really hard. So I remember initially it was hard for me to even to like drive to the city next to me. And then I wanted to travel. That was our goal, was always to travel the world. That's something that my husband and I always talked about. It's like when we were retired or when the kids were old enough, we were going to travel globally. Like, and that was going to be kind of our hobby. And that was going to be where all of our energy was going to go to. I wanted to travel. I don't know if that was more my dream than his. I think that he just wanted to make me happy because I don't think he really wanted, when I'd say, where do you want to go? He didn't really have a lot of places he wanted to go. I had a huge bucket list. And when he died, I thought that was going to die too, because there's no way that I can get on a plane by myself with my kids or, go to a foreign country by myself with my kids. That seemed like crazy ridiculous. I think that would be hard for some people in general, but then you add my social anxiety of second doubting myself and worried about, how I'm going to be perceived and if I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. It just seemed so overwhelming. But in that last year and a half, I just started to travel with my kids and we started slow. It was like we went up to like the state next to us. Then we went further and further. Fast forward now, it's been 3.5 years since he's passed away. And we went to Alaska in the winter. We've been to Hawaii. And then we went to Europe and France and Italy and Switzerland and Sweden and Denmark. We recently went to Japan. Where else have we gone? We just went to the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean. So we're traveling a lot. We're going to Vietnam. We're going to South Korea. We're going back to the Dominican Republic. So my kids know a lot of travel. And, we went to Bali. That was really fun too. And I started off, doing safe things and we're starting to get more and more brave. But a lot of this has to do with my social anxiety and really pushing myself to do things that are uncomfortable. So it's a long story, but let me bring it back. I dusted it off. I got it edited and I shopped it around and I got a publisher and they're like, we can publish it. And so that was really exciting. Initially I wanted it to be published by like Random House or HarperCollins or like a bit. And so I wasted a lot of time like trying to find an agent, querying an agent over and over again. And then I had published with Jessica Kingsley publisher, JKP, who is part of Hatchet UK. And they have published, at that point, they published a couple of my books. And so I went back and I looked at them and I was like, oh, they do publish memoirs. So I thought, I'll reach out to them, because I was having no luck finding an agent, and you can't even get to those other publishers unless you have an agent. And I don't think they publish a lot of memoirs, but I was like, there aren't any, social anxiety memoirs out there that are fully social anxiety. And so I kind of sold it that way, and they took it on. And so I am grateful and excited, because I didn't want to self-publish it because it felt embarrassing to self-publish a social anxiety memoir. Like, I wanted someone else to believe in it. I wanted the validation that it was well written and that it was a good book. And so I have no problem self-publishing my other books. I've only self-published one book, Anxiety Sucks, but I didn't want to self-publish this one. I wanted this one to be backed up and someone else was investing in it. So the book is a little bit unique in that the structure of the memoir is different than most memoirs I've read. And my goal was to teach people. I wanted someone to be able to pick this up who either, one, has social anxiety, or two, has a loved one with social anxiety. And I wanted them to be able to I wanted them to see the struggle. So if you are someone who has social anxiety, I wanted you to feel seen. I wanted you to read my book and my story and be like, whoa, I thought I was the only one. So I wanted it to serve as a mechanism of normalization, to feel seen, to feel heard. Like, that's what I was looking for when I was looking for a memoir for myself on social anxiety. And if you are a loved one, if you're raising a child with social anxiety, I want you to get into the head of your child, perhaps, and be like, whoa, I didn't realize that these are so many things that people think about and worry about. To really get into the mind of someone with social anxiety on a deep level can grow your empathy, your understanding, and even how you approach them with social anxiety. So that was my number one goal. The second goal was that I wanted it to be a quasi-prescriptive self-help book. I wanted someone to be able to pick it up and enjoy reading it and then leave being like, I know exactly what I need to do to crush my own social anxiety. I wanted it to be somewhat of a manual without it being a manual. I wanted it to be a self-help book without it being a self-help book. I wanted someone to be able to learn experientially through reading this the steps that they need to take. I wanted the book to be able to be transformative to someone else. And so whether you are raising a child with anxiety or I'm so used to saying that, raising a child with anxiety, or raising a child with social anxiety, or you have social anxiety, I want it to be a powerful tool either way. And so I feel like parents can read this and see the journey that you want to take your child on, or the journey you want your child to engage in. And for those that are old enough to read it themselves, I think it's absolutely appropriate for a teenager and older, depending on your child's reading level. There's nothing in the book that is inappropriate. There's nothing in the book that's sexual. The book is very clean. The only thing that might be something you would want to be careful about, depending on your child's other anxiety or OCD themes, is I do go into kind of graphic detail in the epilogue about my husband's death and about me finding him and what that experience was like. I did write an epilogue to wrap up the book, so I did have to go back and do some writing, and that might be something people would want to skip if they have, issues that would be overly triggering for. And there is some suicidal talk in there about my father. So those are the only trigger warnings. But that is my goal, is that it's this tool, because that's what memoirs have done for me. I have read memoirs and it's like literally changed me and has made me evolve and be a better person because of that experience. This memoir is much more direct in that way. And I'll tell you what I mean. So the way that it's structured is it bounces back and forth. So you are in my past in one chapter, then you're in the present. So they go back and forth. And then some chapters that are in the present, I go back and I start doing therapy with my younger selves. And that's why I said it's different than most memoirs you read, because that has a little bit of a fantasy aspect to it. And that's really what I was doing when my husband died, and I was trying to, it brought up, I went and I did EMDR therapy for the trauma of like seeing him and trying to resuscitate him. And very quickly, my EMDR sessions were starting to go back in time. They went back to a situation that I had with him that was really hurtful. And then it went back even further. And then it went back to school. And I was going back to all these pain points that were my social anxiety, because his death really triggered so much more than just grief. It opened up a huge gap in where my social anxiety was. I started to like mentally heal my younger selves and go through different things and how I viewed them. And so in the book, I literally do that. And it was actually incredibly therapeutic. I think everybody should do this. In the book, I talk about how in my family, everybody has therapy. Everybody had therapy. And now I'm a therapist and I give therapy, and my kids are all in therapy. And the only person who's never had therapy was myself and my younger selves. And so I said, it's long overdue. And so I go back and I start with Miss 7, and I pick up Miss 7 from my waiting room, and my adult self starts to talk to Miss 7 about her experiences, which you're privy to because you are reading about my past as you go. And so you see it from the perception of my 7-year-old self, my 14-year-old self, my 21-year-old self. And then you see me talking to my 21-year-old self as my current therapist state, processing those social anxiety perceptions and misperceptions. And then it goes back to the present. So you're bouncing back and forth in the book from past, present, and then therapy with my younger selves, all the way up to the point where I am actually almost meet my current self. And that's kind of where it ends. And then there's the epilogue about that. But I think that is helpful because you start to see how you can reframe your thinking. You can start to see how you can heal your younger selves. I also, in the book, do some exposure response prevention, or I do some ERP for my social anxiety. And so you see me doing exposure ladders. And this is all the stuff that I did in real life. Like this is what I did. And you see how hard it was for me, and you see the things that I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And as I walk through it, and I feel like hearing it in a story versus just a therapist telling you, oh, do like a hierarchy or do an exposure ladder or do this, and not understanding why, I'm hoping is a really good tool for you or your kids. And I also personify my social anxiety in the book, and I show how effective personifying your social anxiety can be and how I utilize that and how I empower myself by personifying it. So all hopefully good things. But after the break, I want to tell you what I'm really the most nervous about. Stay tuned. That's up next. It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was like the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Welcome back. All right, so, objectively, I feel like, the memoir is really going to be a helpful tool to other people's social anxiety. And that's really what it's about. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. It's not about me getting accolades or non-accolades. It's really about putting something out in the world from my own pain to turning it into purpose. I'm all about pain, turning pain into purpose. That's just been my life motto. And this is just another way to do that, to help people. But I'm still human. And as it gets closer, there are so many levels of concern. One, this isn't a concern, but it's just a reality. I have a family member who's not talking to me anymore, who hasn't actually talked to me in almost a year because of the book. I don't think the book is offensive, but that's unfortunate. I think when you write memoirs and you're writing about your family and your childhood and your history, and you weave other people into it, it's risky. It's risky because you're being vulnerable and you're telling your truth, but sometimes people don't want to hear your truth. That is the big risk of writing memoir. But that's not my concern. That's just something that has happened, and that's unfortunate, and that is what it is. But I'm really worried about being embarrassed. These are my deepest inner struggles and when you're writing a memoir, you don't realize you want to write it. And this is how I was trained when I was taking these classes from that professor. Like, you want to write without thinking about the world reading it. And so it becomes this very private, almost like you're writing in a journal, because you're not thinking about anyone else reading it. You're not thinking about how people are going to react to it. You're just writing it raw and real. And I'm really good at doing that without, even in the podcast, I'm sitting in here in my house, in my office. I love coming in here and just rambling in my microphone. I don't realize that other people are going to hear this. When people say, oh, I listened to your episode of this, it's like always embarrassing because I'm like, oh my gosh, you listened to that? Well, yeah, people must be listening to it because this podcast is actually ranked like one of the top 200 parenting podcasts in the world. But I still have the illusion that I'm just talking to myself. So I wrote it that way. And so it's a little squeamish. I'm also worried. I've got two worries. I'm really worried that it won't do well. And when you have social anxiety, the whole core fear is that you're not enough. And then you put your whole life story out there and you write it, and then it doesn't do well, or people criticize it. Okay, well, that's another worry. Let me get to that. So it not doing well, and it's really hard. I mean, like, intellectually, I know it's hard for books to do well, especially when you're not Stephen King. I have a following, but I'm not big, I'm not bigger than the anxiety and OCD world. And even there, it's very specific. And so there is I'm cautious for my own little selves inside of me that they're going to feel rejection and hurt when the book doesn't do well. But it may not, but there is the likelihood of it not doing crazy well is very high because I'm not famous. But I also worry if it did do really well, like let's just say it got into the right hands and it just built up momentum. That can happen even from a no-named author. And I know I'm putting myself down, but that could happen. And then a lot of attention's overwhelming for me too. And so, if I had to go do like big interviews or, got a lot of attention, I think that would overwhelm me. I think it's a better problem. I'd rather deal with that than the other. The other thing though is if it does do well, which again is like winning the lottery, because memoirs in and of themselves, I think it's hard to break into, the bestseller categories in memoir. There's just so many out there and so very few get noticed. And so I've noticed this, like if I have something like a YouTube video or a reel that goes beyond my audience and, takes off bigger, that's when like the mean people come in because they don't know you. Like I'm so cocooned because everybody that follows my work or who's in my audience or in my communities, they're all so nice to me. And I'm like really protected because people aren't mean to me. I don't get mean comments. People aren't rude. They're not confrontational because that's not my personality. And I tend to attract people in my audience who are kind, thank goodness. But once it goes outside of my little bubble, then you get the mean comments. And that happens when a book does well. So it's a double-edged sword. It's like you don't want it to do bad, but you don't want it to do well because then you get all these mean critics, or they could be insensitive or harsh, and you have to have thick skin, which is kind of the whole purpose of putting this book out is having thick skin and just being like, oh well. And honestly, I much rather win the memoir lottery, have it do really, really well, and have to deal with those things because that will help me grow, than have it sit on a shelf, get dusty, nobody reads it, and I feel like, oh, well, that's great. So I do want to offer you something in, speaking of wanting the book to do well. Pre-orders do actually really help, but I'm not one of those people who are like, here, help me make my book successful, because I hate when people do that. It's just, I don't know, maybe that's the social anxiety in me, but I'm all about a give and take. Support my work, but I want to support you. And so I did also do this with my Crushing OCD workbook for kids, and I want to do it with this book as well. And so I do have a social anxiety course. I don't know if you've taken it or if you've seen it, but the course is actually designed for all ages, kids, teens, and adults. And I did that because I feel like with social anxiety, we are healing our younger selves. And so I felt like the course was universal. I felt like anybody at any age, 7 and above or 8 and above, maybe, depending on your child's like cognitive level, could watch these videos and learn how to crush their social anxiety. A lot of crushing your social anxiety is ironically about self-love. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but the first part of the social anxiety course is about your view of not being enough. Because when you do think you're enough, that's like kryptonite to social anxiety. The more you think you're enough, the more you think that you have this positive trait, or you love these things about yourself, or you are protective of yourself, it takes the power away from social anxiety, because then you're like, if you don't think I'm enough, then that's a you problem, because I love Natasha and I've got her back. Yeah, I speak in third person. So the beginning part of the course is all about finding out what you think you're not enough in, because social anxiety tends to be, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not funny enough. I'm not popular enough. I'm not athletic enough. And it's different for each person. My social anxiety looks totally different than my daughter's right now. I don't care what I look like, but I probably did at her age. But I can go to the grocery store and look pretty disheveled, and I don't care anymore because I've done all of my work. But that never really was a big theme for me, where for her, if she's not perfectly ready to go, I have to give her like an hour warning if we're going to go somewhere so she can get ready. Different lack of enoughness, is it, right? I mean, my not enough is different than hers. And then the course continues and it teaches you how to do an exposure ladder and how to work through your exposure ladder and how to come out the other side. So that is my social anxiety course. It is $127 in my online school at atparentingsurvivalschool.com. But what I wanted to offer you, if you have social anxiety or if you have a loved one with social anxiety, is you can pre-order my book and you can get the $127 social anxiety course for free. And so this offer will end October 19th. When I did this with my Crushing OCD workbook, I didn't put an end date. And we were getting emails every day for like months and months to come. We still get emails, and it's been since February. So what is that? It's been like 6 months. Yeah, 5 months, 6 months. So I'm not going to make that mistake with this book. So the book is called Out of My Shell, Overcoming Social Anxiety from Childhood to Adulthood. And it will be released September 19th of 2024. You know what's crazy as well? There's going to be an audio version, which I'm super excited about because I love audiobooks. That's how I digest every memoir I read. They didn't ask me to read it. They didn't even give me an option to read it. But you know what? I was like, I had this book called It's Brave to Be Kind. It's a children's book. It has very few words in it. It's the smallest, cutest little book about being brave enough to be kind and stand up for other kids and yourself. And that got sold to a large publishing firm. I don't remember if it was I think it was Penguin House or HarperCollins. I think it was Penguin House. And they offered me to read it, and it was a complete nightmare. I was in the studio literally the entire day, and the producer kept on being like, no, you have to slow down. You have to repeat your P, your T needs to be pronounced. And honestly, I think they made me sound ridiculous by the end of it. I never even listened to the audio version because it felt so ridiculous. And I actually just looked it up, and I don't even see it on Audible anymore. So maybe I did a really bad job because they made me sound absolutely ridiculous. So I wasn't too upset when they said, well, they didn't tell me they're not going to use me as the voice actor. They just said, here are some options for your voice actor. And none of them were me. But you know what? That's a special talent. And so I don't mind. If I was going to get a producer like the one I had, I would rather die than do it. I can't imagine getting through an entire book with someone being like, nope, we have to redo that sentence. You didn't really hit the P hard enough. It would be a nightmare. But I think she was uniquely difficult to work with. So you could get the Audible version as well. But those should both be coming out, I think, September 19th. But if you pre-order, you will get a coupon code for my social anxiety course. And so there are directions on a website that will tell you like who to email. You just send us the receipt of your pre-order. Pre-orders are open now. And then we will send you a coupon code so that you can put in that coupon code and get 100% off. So you can get it for free. And you have lifelong access to my courses. So once you purchase it, you can access it at any time forever. And then you have my book. So that's a pretty nice thing because I think the book, let me look at it. I don't even know because I don't get a lot from these books, to be honest with you. You only get a couple of dollars a book when you publish with the publisher. But the paperback is $19.95. I don't know if that goes down ever. And I don't know how much it will be on audiobook because it's not. Let me see if it's listed. Let me look. Ooh, it is on Audible. So you can pre-order it on Audible as well. And it is, if you're part of Audible, it's $19.09. I have no idea why they do that. $19.09 or 1 credit, obviously. So if you get the Audible or the paperback version, either one, just email us, and the email is on the website at socialanxietyreality.com. And then we will send you that coupon code to get that course for free. This offer ends October 19th. And so we'll go a month out. So it will eventually turn into not a pre-order, but just an order of the book. But the pre-orders really do help. If we're getting a crazy amount of people, maybe we'll close it before then. So definitely pre-order it. That's a better thing to do. And you'll get it in a month because if you're listening to this live, or sooner if you're listening to this later. But you can go to socialanxietyreality.com and you can learn more about the book, watch the trailer, and look at the social anxiety course. We have a trailer for that as well, and see if that you think that will be helpful. The other thing that I did that I just want to mention before we wrap up is I quietly created an Instagram account for social anxiety, and it's a different type of account. If you're following me on Instagram at ATParentingSurvival, that's my handle for my main account. That's where I do reels to support you raising your children with anxiety or OCD. My Instagram account is called Social Anxiety Reality. And it's very different. It's much more of a vulnerable account, and it's about my struggles. I didn't really want to position myself as the go-to expert on social anxiety, although I feel like that's going to probably be what happens because I've already gotten like requests for interviews to talk about social anxiety and how to help other people. But I honestly didn't want to be like the poster child of how to help people. I really wanted to be the poster child of the lived experience of social anxiety, because I think when you have social anxiety, you feel like you're never 100% over it. And so there's this feeling of, I don't want to be like this like person that is like, I have gotten rid of my social anxiety. Let me tell you how. Because no, it's a daily struggle and it's hard. And I don't really feel like I'm much more comfortable telling you I can help you raise your child with anxiety or OCD, even though I'm still doing it. But social anxiety is more vulnerable, and that account is more raw. My reels are more about my struggles. So it's less prescriptive of like, hey, this is what you should do. Although sometimes I sprinkle a little bit of that in, but it is more of validating the struggle and giving people a little like peek into my own struggles. So if you're not following there and this is interesting to you, follow me on Instagram at Social Anxiety Reality. I'd love to see you over there. I do reels every other day disclosing all of my struggles. And you'll get an up close and personal view of what is going on in Natasha's head. So I hope that you found this helpful. If you enjoy my podcast in general, don't forget to hit a star and review it, or write a review. I greatly appreciate that. And don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do. Next week, we're going to be talking about how we don't know if our kids will succeed unless we let them fail. So I'm going to talk about why it's important to let our kids fail, or to give them a little wiggle room to fail in order for them to succeed. So don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that episode, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.